57
tissues, we
p.m.
refer to all the lesions which arise from the nerves, from the muscles, whether smooth muscles or skeletal muscle bundles, from the fibrous tissue, that is lesions of the fibroblast, lesions of arising from the adipose tissue or fat cells, and lesions which arise and form the blood vessels. These could be benign tumors, these could be malignant tumors, or these could be tumor-like lesions. Though technically speaking, all non-epithelial tissues are included under the lesions of the mesenchyme, but here we are not covering lesions of the bone, which are separately included under the bony lesions, which we have been covering. The lesions of the joints, which we will also cover today as a separate session. Hemopoietic cells, which we have already covered under the hematology section. Lesions of the lymphoid tissue, predominantly the Hodgkin's and the non-Hodgkin's lymphomas, and the neural system, the central nervous system, are not included under the lesions of the soft tissues, though we include the lesions of the peripheral nerves amongst the lesions of the soft tissues. How do we name them? We suffix them as OMA for the benign lesions, like a neurofibroma arising from the peripheral nerve bundle, and a neurofibrosarcoma when it is a malignant tumor. Similarly, if it is a tumor of the smooth muscles, we call it a leiomyoma, which is a benign tumor of the smooth muscle, and a leiomyosarcoma for the malignant tumor of the smooth muscle. The tumor arising from the skeletal muscle is similarly suffixed as an OMA for a rhabdomyoma, which is a benign tumor, and a rhabdomyosarcoma, which is a malignant tumor. So, majority of the malignant soft tissue tumors, which are the sarcomas, have a complex karyotype, and some of these we will discuss today. Now, as you have already learned histology, and we know that fibroblasts are long, thin, spindled out cells with a thin elongated nucleus, a spindled out nucleus with pointed ends. So this is a fibroblast, and it lays down abundant collagen, so it is there in the background of collagen. So what is the tumor which arises from the fibroblast? So the benign tumor of the fibroblast is a fibroma, and when it occurs in the skin and the soft subcutaneous tissue, we call it a dermatofibroma. While a malignant tumor of the fibroblast is called as the fibrosarcoma. In between, there is a tumor-like lesion which is essentially benign and is formed of reactive proliferation of fibroblasts, which is called as fibromatosis. That occurs whenever there is a trauma to that area or the patient has a tendency to develop the fibromatosis, reactive proliferation of fibroblasts with abundant collagen which is being laid down. This fibromatosis has an locally invasive property, but it does not metastasize, and it has no cytological features of malignancy. That means it does not show anaplasia. There is no increase in nuclear cytoplasmic ratio, no increase in mitosis, and no atypia at all. Now, when do these fibromas arise? Fibromas arise generally in the second and third decade of life, usually occur in the skin and subcutaneous tissue of the arm and forearm, and less commonly in the distal extremities. While fibromatosis usually are seen in the abdominal wall, that is in the abdominal wall fascia, and sometimes in the extra-abdominal structures, like in the palms when they are called as the palmar fibromatosis in the palmar facial sheath, or arising from the plantar facial sheath when they are called as the plantar fibromatosis, and extremely uncommonly they may arise from the penile fascia when they are called as the penile fibromatosis. Majority of the times we get the abdominal wall fibromatosis in women, usually in the middle age group, 20 to 40 years of age group we see them, and they usually occur after a history of an abdominal surgery. For example, a cesarean section a woman has undergone, and then you have an increased tumor-like proliferation of the fibroblast with abundant laying down of collagen, which looks like a tumor, but it is not a tumor. Fibrosarcoma also arises from long spindled out cells, the fibroblast, lays down collagen, but it is much more cellular. The collagen is much less as compared to what occurs in a benign fibroma because functionality is less. It generally occurs in older age group between 50 to 70 years of age, and other than occurring in the superficial soft tissues, it is occurring mostly deep to the deep fascia, so occurs in the deep soft tissues. So that is the essential difference between fibrous fibroma and fibrosarcoma. Here we can see that this is a lesion which is formed of long, thin spindled out cells, and we can see that the nuclei are long, thin spindled out with pointed ends resembling the fibroblasts, and there is pink collagen material inside it. There is no hyperchromasia, no prominence of nucleoli, all cells essentially looking similar to each other, no areas of necrosis or hemorrhage. So this is a benign fibroma. And when this lesion is present just in the dermis and subcutaneous tissue, we call it a dermatofibroma. Here we can see the epidermis is all thinned out and stretched, and there is a benign proliferation of fibroblastic cells expanding the entire dermis. So this is a fibroma of the skin called as the dermatofibroma. Now we can compare it from the previous slide. Here the cells are much more plumper, the nuclei are much more larger, and the dense pink background which we saw in the previous slide is hardly there. Here we can see much more of this pink collagen material which is being laid down. Here the collagen is much less, the cells are more proliferating, and one can see that there is a little anucleosis and isonucleosis. So there is variation in the nuclear shape and size also. A pleomorphism is also there, right? And one can see a few mitoses which are occurring in these nuclei. So this is a condition called as the fibrosarcoma. Fine. So benign is a fibroma, malignant is a fibrosarcoma. Malignant usually occur in the older age group, while benign generally occurs in the younger age group. And when occurring in the dermis, we call it a dermatofibroma. Now, similarly, what is the tumor of the smooth muscle? The tumor of the smooth muscle is a leiomyoma. You just now saw the example of a leiomyoma occurring in the uterus, which occurs generally in women in the genital tract 20 to 40 years of age group. While the benign leiomyoma arises mostly in the skin in younger age group 20 to 30 years of age, and it arises from the erector pili muscle of the skin. So then it can present as small painful nodules in the dermis and subcutaneous tissue, which would be there in the extremities generally when it is occurring, because otherwise we do not have smooth muscle in the skin and the soft tissues. We get the smooth muscle either as part in the genital tract or in the gastrointestinal tract. So sometimes we can have leiomyomas which can occur in the gastrointestinal tract, and that may present as a polyp occurring within the intestinal tract. Uncommonly, we can have leiomyosarcomas occurring in the thigh and retroperitoneum. Now, what could be the site of origin? Because in the thigh, we do not have smooth muscle. Similarly, in retroperitoneum, we do not have smooth muscle. It is understood and it is believed that they arise from the tunica media of the blood vessels. Now, we all remember that the blood vessel has three components: the tunica intima, which is just beneath the endothelial lining, formed of loose fibroconnective tissue. And then we have the tunica intima, which is formed of smooth muscle bundles. And from these smooth muscle bundles, it is said that there could be origin of the malignant and benign tumors occurring in the soft tissues. And when you get these malignant tumors in the extremities, especially in the thigh, usually occur in the 40 to 60 years of age group or in the retroperitoneum, it is likely arising from the tunica media of the blood vessels. So that is supposed to be the origin of the smooth muscle tumors when it occurs in the soft tissues. Otherwise, generally we get tumors of the skeletal muscles occurring over here. Now, what do these look like? They look exactly like what you see in the female genital tract. That means formed of long spindled out cells present in intersecting fascicles. So you have this bundle of smooth muscle which is going in one direction. There is this another bundle of smooth muscle in another direction. There is this another bundle which is there, and all of them intersect each other at various angles and may even intersect at perpendicular angles or 90-degree angles. So these smooth muscles, when they are present in long bundles, they are called as the fascicles, and these fascicles intersect at each other. How do we differentiate them from fibroblast? The nuclei of the smooth muscle have a blunt end. They have the rounded ends, though they are both spindled out. The fibroblastic nuclei are also spindled out. The smooth muscle nuclei are also spindled out. However, they have rounded ends. and they almost form perpendicular long structures similar to the cigars. So they are sometimes even called as the cigar-shaped nuclei. But even though they are there, the other difference is in the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm of the smooth muscle has fibrils. So they are the myofibrils which are present, and they have myosin protein in them, the muscle actin protein in them. So which is the usual component present in the smooth muscle bundles, in the smooth muscle cytoplasm, which is not there in the fibroblastic cells. So that gives a dense pink appearance rather than the pale pink appearance that we see in the cytoplasm of the fibroblast. This gives you a bright pink appearance in the cytoplasm of these smooth muscles. And they can be stained with immunohistochemical markers for actin, which is the smooth muscle actin, smooth muscle myosin, and caldesmon protein. So these are the ones which would be positive. How do we differentiate it from malignant smooth muscle tumors? There is no variation in nuclear shape. There is no hyperchromasia. There is no prominence of nucleoli. The mitosis is not prominent. It is less than 5 per 50 high power field in the skeleton, in the smooth muscle bundles. And there is no necrosis or hemorrhage. So the features of malignancy which are there in sarcomas are absent in this. Low mitosis, no atypia, slow growing tumor, well circumscribed, though not encapsulated, and lacking any mitosis and atypia. However, when we compare it with the smooth malignant tumors, you will find that they will show variation in the shape and size, and we can not differentiate it from the fibrosarcomas. So the malignant tumors of the leiomyosarcomas and malignant tumors of the fibrosarcomas may essentially look similar because both of them show high nucleocytoplasmic ratio, pleomorphism, increased mitosis, and the way we can differentiate it by doing a immunohistochemical marker for smooth muscle actin, which would be positive in the smooth muscle tumors or leiomyosarcomas, but they will not be positive in cases of fibrosarcomas. Now, what will fibrosarcomas be positive for? Fibrosarcomas will show immunohistochemical expression of vimentin, which is a pan-mesenchymal marker. Vimentin will be positive in both leiomyosarcomas and fibrosarcomas. However, it will not be positive in cases the fibrosarcomas will lack smooth muscle markers. So that is how we will be able to differentiate them from the two. The other thing is leiomyosarcomas generally show much more pleomorphism as compared to fibrosarcomas, and may show, the well differentiated ones may show fascicular pattern intact. So coming on to another tissue tumors, which is the tumors of the blood vessels. One slide that you saw today was the blood vessel benign tumor formed of small capillary channels. So tumors of the blood vessels are again suffixed as angiomas, and so this is called as an angioma. So when they are formed of blood vessels, we call it a hemangioma. That means these blood vessels have presence of RBCs in them. Generally, hemangiomas occur in the first decade of life and sometimes may even be at birth. You may see them at birth, generally in the head and neck region, usually as a small red color or a cherry colored papule or a macule present on the face or the head and neck region, which can be seen. So when they are all formed of small blood vessels, like similar to what we see in normal capillary sized blood vessels, we call it a capillary hemangioma. And when they are formed of large interconnecting blood vessels, we call it a cavernous hemangioma. However, if it is formed of blood vessels, if it is formed of vessels, but there is no blood in them, so there is only presence of plasma or lymph-like material, which is only staying pink in color with some WBCs in it, then we call it a lymphangioma. Generally, lymphangiomas are formed of cavernous channels, so they present as large cystic masses, generally in the head and neck region, and a small child with a large cystic compressible mass in the neck is known to have a cavernous lymphangioma, also called as the cystic hygroma. So here we can see that there is an overlying skin, epidermis is there, And just beneath the epidermis, we have these large interconnecting channels separated by thin fibrous septa with some subcutaneous fat which has also been entrapped in it, and they are formed of a single line of endothelial cells with presence of pale pink lymph material in them. And this is a lymphangioma which is present. So that is how one can differentiate the lymphangioma from a hemangioma. The hemangiomas will have blood cells into it, while the lymphangiomas will be formed of these large cavernous channels lined by a flattened layer of endothelial cells with thin septa having loose connective tissue, and they may show presence of these lymphoid aggregates in the lymphangiomas. Presence of these collections of lymphocytes would be absent in hemangiomas, while hemangiomas will show presence of these small capillary-like blood vessels lined by plump endothelial cells, and many of them may show presence of RBCs in them. So red blood cells present in these blood vessels help you in making the diagnosis of an angioma or a hemangioma, and they generally occur in small children, usually 0 to 10 years of age, and may sometimes be present since birth. Some of these may regress or reduce in size as the child grows older. However, if it is not decreasing in size, then you may need to simply excise it. No further treatment is required. Many a times, if we keep compressing these blood vessels, the RBCs may extravasate out into the periphery, into the septas, in the interstitium areas, and the RBCs may get converted. The hemoglobin will get converted into the hemosiderin, which can be seen as this bright colored brown refractile material, which is the hemosiderin material. So that can be a sometimes indicator that this has been there for some time. Here we can see that there are these large interconnecting channels filled with pink plasma as well as red blood cells. So this is a cavernous hemangioma. While the previous one, which was formed of capillary-sized blood vessels, is called as the capillary hemangioma. So we can have cavernous hemangiomas, we can have capillary hemangiomas, and if these channels show presence of mitosis, nuclear atypia, areas of necrosis, and infiltration into the surrounding tissues, we call it an angiosarcoma. Remember, angiosarcomas are very rare tumors and generally occur in older age groups, 60 to 80 years of age. Uncommonly, they may be seen in younger age groups, especially in women who have been operated for breast carcinomas. And post chemotherapy, there may be occurrence of a lymphangiosarcoma and angiosarcoma occurring at the site of the previous tumor where the tumor has been excised. Otherwise, they generally occur in the older age group. A specific variant of angiosarcoma called as Kaposi's sarcoma is formed of thin spindled out endothelial cells, and that is seen in patients with HIV/AIDS. So that is an AIDS-related, HIV/AIDS-related tumor, which is also an angiosarcoma. Otherwise, angiosarcomas are very uncommon tumors. Now coming on to tumors of the peripheral nerve sheath. We call them as peripheral nerve sheath tumors, and they are mostly benign. So fortunately, most of them are benign, and the one which is single and encapsulated is called as the schwannoma, while those which are generally multiple and unencapsulated are the neurofibromas. So neurofibromas are mostly associated with neurofibromatosis. So it can be inherited as autosomal dominant disorder. The familial neurofibromatosis which will be associated with neurofibromatosis 1 and neurofibromatosis 2. And familial ones generally occur at younger age group between 10 to 20 years of age, in which the patient may present with multiple cutaneous and subcutaneous neurofibromas. While schwannomas are uncommon, usually solitary, cause a complete expansion of the nerve which is there. They are encapsulated tumors, mostly occur in head and neck region and occur in a slightly older age group as compared to neurofibromas, from 20 to 50 years of age. It is these patients who have neurofibromatosis, associated with the familial neurofibromatosis 1 and 2 gene, who are predisposed to a malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor, which is a neurofibrosarcoma. So sporadic neurofibrosarcomas are extremely rare. Whenever you get to see a neurofibrosarcomas, also called as the malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors, which generally occur in the proximal part of the extremities, so occur in the upper arm or in the thigh region, very rarely on the trunk, then you should always suspect patient has an underlying neurofibromatosis. Now, how do these benign nerve sheath tumors look like? They look like nerve bundles. Now, smooth muscle cells are also spindled out cells, fibroblasts are also spindled out cells, and so are the nerve cells. So how do we characterize and identify these nerve cells separate from fibroblast and smooth muscle cells? Remember, nerve cells are smaller in size. They are short spindled as compared to the long spindled, which are the fibroblast and smooth muscles, and they have a very wavy pattern. Here you can see the wavy pattern of both the cytoplasm and the nuclei, and they are present as small tiny bundles. So they are present in small tiny nerve twigs which are scattered in a background of collagen with few fibroblasts scattered in between. So that is why they are called as neurofibromas. They have the component of Schwann cells and they have the component of fibroblast. Sometimes these neurofibromas, here you can see they are all short spindled out cells which are occurring in the skin and subcutaneous tissue, may form a diffuse pattern, but even in those diffuse patterns, you may find these small nerve bundle-like appearance, differentiation to form and aggregate to form small nerve twig-like appearances. This helps you in making a diagnosis. So here we can see all nuclei are tiny, thin, spindled out with a very wavy pattern in a fibrillary background. There is no atypia, there is no mitosis, no hemorrhage, no necrosis, so a completely benign tumor. If these features are seen with increased mitosis, nuclear atypia, and pleomorphism, then you should consider making a diagnosis of a neurofibrosarcoma or a malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor. Now, if a spindled out tumor shows all these features, it may resemble a fibrosarcoma also, and it would resemble a leiomyosarcoma also. How to differentiate between the two? So, fibrosarcomas will express vimentin, leiomyosarcomas will express smooth muscle actin and muscle specific actin, while the neurofibrosarcomas will express S100 protein and neurofilament. Because malignant tumors will show similar features, it sometimes gets difficult to identify all of these from each other, and then we use the help of immunohistochemical markers. Now, this is another neurofibromas in which the nerve bundles are large and thick, but it is still benign. So this is called as the large plexiform bundles, so called as the plexiform neurofibroma, and the patient also has disfiguring cutaneous neurofibromatosis. So this usually occurs in patients of neurofibromatosis when there are large disfiguring tumors occurring on the skin and subcutaneous tissue, generally multiple in number all over the body, and the patient has a very disfigured appearance. These are the patients who are prone to develop a neurofibrosarcoma. So what is a neurofibroma? Neurofibroma is non-encapsulated proliferation of all elements of peripheral nerves. In contrast, schwannoma is an encapsulated proliferation. In this, we get to see Schwann cells, which have a wire-like collagen fibrils. That means they have wavy serpentine nuclei with pointed ends. They may form structures of the nerve origin like the Meissner's corpuscles, Pacinian corpuscles, and you may see formation of axons which can be highlighted by silver stain with the neurofilament strain, and there will be interspersed fibroblasts and collagen patterns. But they would be positive for neurofilament protein. While in contrast, the schwannoma shows organization of these nerve bundles and the nuclei lay parallel to each other in stack-like formations. So they are stacked with each other like a stack of coins, and that is called as the Verrucke body. So there are two areas in the schwannoma, the antennae A areas, which are the cellular ones, and the low cellular areas. So there are low cells with areas with low cellularity and areas with high cellularity. And it is these highly cellular areas in which nuclei align with each other in the form of a bundle. So they are present like a stack of coins or a stack of bundle of wooden sticks. So this is called as the palisading pattern, which is very characteristically seen in patients of schwannomas, which have loose and high cellular areas, also called as the antennae A and antennae B areas. So what is a schwannoma? This is also a benign peripheral nerve sheath tumor, similar to neurofibroma, but this is encapsulated. It has cellular areas which palisade, forming Verrucke body, and it has loose areas which form myxoid component called as the antennae B areas, but both are benign. Neurofibromas generally are present as multiple lesions in the patient, while schwannomas are usually single and encapsulated tumors. So two benign peripheral nerve sheath tumors we have learned today. One is a neurofibroma, which occurs as multiple, may be associated with sporadic or familial neurofibromatosis, while schwannoma occurs as an encapsulated benign nerve sheath tumor, but has cellular and very cellular areas and low cellular areas with formation of palisades of nuclei called as the Verrucke bodies. Now I will spend less time on this because Dr. Ishu has already shown you. This is the fibrous capsule present at the periphery, and it is formed of mature adipose tissue cells. So a tumor of the mature adipocytes looking all similar to each other, very tiny nuclei compressed at one end of the cell is a lipoma. How to differentiate it from the subcutaneous fat where it usually occurs? It will be encapsulated, while the subcutaneous fat will be present as lobules and it won't be encapsulated. Now, lipoma is also may occur as multiple lesions in the skin and subcutaneous tissue. Generally occurs in the superficial tissues of extremities and trunk, may sometimes occur in the retroperitoneum and gluteal region or the trunk extremities. Right? So this is benign lipoma which is there. And when you get to see such large nuclei in patients of which has adipose tissue differentiation, here you can see those large nuclei and multiple vacuoles which are present in these cytoplasm. So look at these large high nucleocytoplasmic ratio, small vacuoles. Sometimes they compress on the nuclei. So this is a liposarcoma. Generally occurs in the deep soft tissues in older patients 60 to 70 years of age and are associated with MDM2 gene amplification, which is there. So occurs in deep soft tissues and retroperitoneum and shows high nucleocytoplasmic ratio, mitosis, pleomorphism, and prominence of nuclei. And these cells with the multiple vacuolated appearance are called as lipoblasts. So they are called as lipoblast in contrast to the lipocytes or adipocytes that we see in a lipoma. Now coming on to tumors of the skeletal muscle bundles. The benign is called as the rhabdomyoma, which may occur at any age, usually occur in the head and neck region or in the genitalia, generally in the scrotum or in the perineal regions. And they are called as the genital rhabdomyomas and formed of normal appearing skeletal muscle bundles in aggregates. However, the malignant tumors are the one which we are more concerned about. Now, the malignant tumors are called as rhabdomyosarcoma. Now, rhabdomyosarcomas are of three types. One which occur in younger age group, less than 5 years of age, which are called as embryonal rhabdomyosarcomas, and they are formed of small undifferentiated round cells. So they are called as the embryonal rhabdomyosarcomas, and they may occur in the genitourinary tract, they may occur in the nose, and they may occur in the middle ear, sometimes even in the ureter and the urinary bladder. Now, what is common amongst all of these? They all are mucosal areas. So it occurs just beneath the mucosa and presents and projects into those luminal surfaces, like in the vagina, like in the urinary bladder, like in the cavity of the nose, or in the cavity of the middle layer as grape-like structures. So when it projects as grape-like structures in these areas, it is also called as sarcoma botryoides. So sarcoma botryoides is nothing but embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma, which is a malignant tumor and occurs in younger age group, generally 2 to 3 years, but up to 5 years of age. In contrast, a tumor of rhabdomyoblast, which looks similar to what you see in the alveoli of the lungs. So it gives you a pattern resembling like lung alveoli, that is called as the alveolar rhabdomyosarcomas. It occurs in extremities in young children between 5 to 15 years of age. So here the tumor cells are separated by thick fibrous septa, which gives you as if they are forming alveoli-like structures, and it occurs in a usually older age group as compared to embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma, and occurs in 5 to 15 years of age. In contrast, the pleomorphic sarcoma, which Dr. Ishu showed you, the pleomorphic rhabdomyosarcoma occurs in older age group, 60 to 70 years of age, and generally occurs in the extremities, that means in the upper limb and the lower limb, which are the more common sites, or in the gluteal region. So the benign ones can occur at any age group. More important to remember is the embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma, which may present as grape-like structures projecting inside the vagina, in the urinary bladder, in the middle ear, or in the nasal cavity, and it occurs in very young children between 1 to 5 years of age, which is called as the embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma or sarcoma botryoides. In contrast, the alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma occurs between 5 to 15 years of age, more commonly between 10 to 15 years of age. So here we can see that this is an embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma formed of undifferentiated cells with a high nucleocytoplasmic ratio, scanty to moderate amount of cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is very pink because it has myoglobin. So how do we stain for it? We stain it with desmin, we stain it with myoglobin, and the nuclei can be stained for a transcription factor, MyoD1. So to differentiate it from another undifferentiated tumors, this shows expression of muscle markers, that means desmin, myoglobin, and MyoD1. All of them will show whether it is alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma, embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma, or pleomorphic rhabdomyosarcoma. The alveolar rhabdomyosarcomas have an alveolar growth pattern, may show partial skeletal muscle differentiation, occurs in early to mid-teens. It shows thin fibrous septa which are separating these tumor cells, and the cell cytoplasm may show cross striations similar to what you see in the normal skeletal muscle bundles. They show deep eosinophilic, deep pink cytoplasm, and may sometimes show pleomorphism with multinucleated giant cells. When they show NMIC amplification, they have a poor prognosis. Why do we need to know it? Because all these patients with a malignant skeletal muscle tumor will require chemotherapy apart from surgery. Hence, if the patient has NMIC amplification, which you have been able to identify, one has to start on aggressive chemotherapy regime. Right? So this is what it is. So to summarize, which are the cytologically malignant spindle cell tumors? Fibrosarcoma, leiomyosarcoma, and malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors. Fibrosarcomas will be positive for vimentin, leiomyosarcomas for smooth muscle actin, and malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors for neurofilament and S100 protein. While rhabdomyosarcomas, which have a round to oval cell appearance or pleomorphic appearance in cases of adults, it will be positive for myoglobin, desmin, and MyoD. So this is a pleomorphic sarcoma, which could be a pleomorphic malignant neurofibrosarcoma. It could be a pleomorphic leiomyosarcoma. it could be a pleomorphic rhabdomyosarcoma. So whether if it is leiomyosarcoma, it would be expressing smooth muscle actin. A pleomorphic rhabdomyosarcoma will express desmin and myoglobin, and the pleomorphic neurofibrosarcomas will express S100 proteins. And a pleomorphic liposarcoma will also express S100, and we can differentiate it from malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors by MDM2 expression. Very, very uncommonly, you may have development of osteosarcomas in the soft tissues not connected to the bone. And those would be positive for osteocalcin and osteopontin. Always one should rule out non-sarcomatous malignancies like carcinoma, which can also show abundant pleomorphism. So it could be a primary carcinoma occurring over here, or could be metastasis from some other sites. So they will express epithelial markers like epithelial membrane antigen and cytokeratin. The non-Hodgkin's lymphomas will express leukocyte common antigen, and melanomas, which are also malignant tumors arising from the melanocytes, will express melanocytic markers, which is a melan A. Now, this I am only showing it to you for your PG entrance examination, not required for your UG passing out one. It is not an essential thing to know, but you should remember that Ewing's sarcoma family of tumors, which occurs in the bone, shows translocation 1122 with a fusion of EWS gene and FLI1 gene, or EWS gene with REG gene. Liposarcomas have a characteristic translocation of 1216. Synovial sarcomas have a characteristic signature translocation between chromosome X and chromosome 18. And alveolar rhabdomyosarcomas show translocation of between chromosome 2 and chromosome 13. And schwannoma is associated with neurofibromatosis 2 gene on chromosome 22. So the above four are sometimes also called as the translocation sarcomas because they are all associated with translocation of the genes. So any questions from the soft tissue lesions which we have covered now? You can ask me. Hemangioma, lipoma are common lesions which you are shown in your practical classes because they are simple to identify. And any one of those like schwannoma or a neurofibroma may come as a short note. But clinically, you will get to see all of them, even if you don't see the pathology of it, but you should know what is their origin, why are they named like this, and what is their clinical presentation, because they are common tumors which occur in our clinical specialty. So when you will be doing your surgery and pediatrics OPD, you will be able to see these patients very commonly coming to the OPD for excision. Now, just a brief recapitulation of the synovial and joint disorders, which we had not done it. So, how do we approach to lesions of the joint? We have to see whether the lesions of the joint is involving only one joint, or it is arising outside the joint, but it is not related to the joint itself. Is the joint disorder actually involving the joint, or it is not involving the joint at all? And if it is involving the joint, is it because of involvement of a single joint, which is the monoarticular, or it is involving multiple joints, which are called as the polyarticular involvement? Similarly, we have to see whether it is an inflammatory lesion or it is an infectious lesion. Generally, the inflammatory lesions will present with involvement of multiple joints, and those with autoimmune etiology will also involve multiple joints, in contrast to localized traumatic and infectious disorders, which will be monoarticular in origin. Always take a history, whether the history is of long duration or it is a short duration, so that you are able to differentiate between the acute inflammatory conditions and chronic inflammatory conditions. And always consider common disorders first and use all the history which is possible. So which are the common things you should be aware of as a general practitioner, as a primary care physician, which you will all be becoming on the first go, and later on specializing in your particular fields of interest. We have to identify whether this arthritis or involvement or infection of the joint, infection of the joint is arthritis, is because of an acute pyogenic infection or not, which is called as the septic arthritis. This is of critical value because you need to immediately treat it by removing the pus and giving antibiotic. The other critical involvement which occurs is of the deposition of the urate crystals, which leads to gout, because there will be hyperuricemia associated with it, and it is imperative to treat hyperuricemia as a critical condition. So patients presenting with gout will also present with arthritis called as the gouty arthritis. Third, which has to be seen, is whether the fracture is continuing into the joint cavity or not. So these are the three important critical conditions when we look at the joint and bone disorders. Now, what are the inflammatory conditions? There could be acute pyogenic infections caused by the staphylococci and streptococci. Then there could be gonorrheal involvement along with the urethritis. There could be arthritis also. And always when we are in India, you cannot ever forget tuberculosis. You must have seen patients, or when you would be visiting your OPDs now in especially orthopedics, you will find that tuberculosis may involve many joints, and when it involves the vertebral joints, the vertebra, then it is called as the Pott's spine, and that is very critical because it may entrap the nerves and the patient may present with paralysis or paraplegia. Right? So there can be weakness because of the entrapment of the surrounding nerves, which can be there in cases of tuberculosis, or there can be collapse of the adjacent vertebra leading to quadriplegia or paraplegia. So that is how important it becomes to identify the etiology so that appropriate treatment can be immediately started. The other inflammatory condition is gout or pseudo-gout. It could be deposition of urate crystals or pyrophosphate crystals. The third group of inflammatory disorders in the joint is which are because of the immune mediated. If we have antibodies to immunoglobulin G forming rheumatoid factor, we can have rheumatoid arthritis, or there could be arthralgias seen in systemic lupus erythematosus because of the similarity of these joint areas. Fine. So then we can have reactive conditions. You have done rheumatic heart disease, and you know that rheumatic heart disease also involves the joint. So it could be a component of rheumatic fever, when there could be, or there could be only reactive arthritis because there is involvement of the bone leading to osteomyelitis. How do we diagnose them? We diagnose them by doing a good local examination, systemic signs and symptoms, and lab findings. Another mode of examination is to remove the synovial fluid and see whether it has infectious pus cells or not. When the total leukocyte count of the synovial fluid will be increased from 2000 to 50,000 per cubic millimeter, and you will find lots and lots of neutrophils in septic arthritis or acute pyogenic arthritis. You can do a culture of the synovial fluid and you will find the characteristic bacteria which would be involved, and you can find the sensitivity of these bacteria to particular antibiotics. If it is a hemorrhagic aspirate, always see whether you are looking at hemophilia with joint involvements, when it could lead to neuropathic joints. Or there could be presence of birefringent crystals of monosodium urate. So this is how synovial fluid examination will help you in making a diagnosis of joint diseases. Any questions till now? I hope I am audible, and you can put your questions in the chat box or in the question session box. So here you can see that there is a slide of the synovial tissue and lots of neutrophils which are present, indicating that this is an infectious arthritis. So you should always remove this pus, send it for culture examination, find out which bacteria is involved, do a sensitivity and start antibiotic therapy appropriately. Otherwise, this will extend into the underlying bone, leading to osteomyelitis, which becomes difficult and more difficult to treat because very few antibiotics penetrate inside the bone. Another common condition which can occur in India is tuberculosis involving the joints, and that is called as the tubercular arthritis. So when you aspirate the synovial fluid, not only you should send it for microbiological culture for Mycobacterium tuberculosis, but you can also make a smear and look for the granulomas which you can see over here. You can see these large cells which are epithelioid cells along with multinucleated giant cells. Look at the arrangement of the nuclei at the periphery of the giant cells called as the Langhans giant cells. And when you do a Ziehl-Neelsen stain like you do in microbiology, you can see these red colored bacilli which are acid fast bacilli, which is typical of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So you can see these large pink staining rod-like structures, which is Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So here one will have to start the anti-tubercular treatment. So it is very important to find the etiology of the arthritis and see what it is. In contrast, osteoarthritis is a degenerative joint disease in which there is progressive erosion of the joint cartilage. So if we are putting too much weight on our joints, especially patients who are obese with a high body weight, those patients are more prone to developing it at an earlier age. Otherwise, it would be seen in the older age groups. So how can we look at it? Normally, what happens is this cartilage gets eroded. You can see this erosion of the cartilage and it will get in close apposition to the hip joint. So the fluid in between, the synovial fluid decreases. There is erosion of the cartilage and there is decrease in the water content. A decreased concentration of proteoglycans occurs, leading to apoptosis of the functional chondrocytes and decreased tensile strength of the chondrocytes. That leads to this friction of the joint cavity with each other, hyaline cartilage moving with the bone, leads to extensive pain and difficulty in movement of the joints. So which joints does it involve? It generally involves the large joints, usually the hip, the knee, and less commonly one can have involvement of the vertebral joints, the interphalangeal joints, both the proximal and the distal interphalangeal joints. Now what do we see in over here? The fibrous synovium, which covers the articular surface, has been eroded. The cartilage gets eroded and the mushroom like bony projections, they project into the joint cavity, and these projecting osteophytes rub against each other, leading to limitation of the movement because of the pain. So the patient normally should be having a smooth hyaline cartilage, articular cartilage, and an abundant amount of fluid which will give you the lubrication. What is happening over here is not only the joint space has decreased, there is loss of the cartilage, but the bony spurs have been formed. So these bony spurs can be easily visualized on the x-rays also. A decrease in the joint space can be seen and you can make a diagnosis by looking at these. In contrast, the rheumatoid arthritis, the patient gives you a long history of an inflammatory disorder. Not only does it involve the joints, it also involves the skin. There is vasculitis, there is involvement of the lung, and there is involvement of the muscle by fibrosis. So there is proliferative inflammatory arthritis along with destruction of the articular cartilage and fusion of the articular cartilages, which occurs, removal of the articular cartilage, and dense fibrosis which occurs, leading to uh, uh, decreased mobility. And because of the decreased mobility which the patient has because of extensive pains, there will be deformities occurring. So which are the joints involved in rheumatoid arthritis? We have involvement of the small joints of the hands and feet, the proximal and the distal interphalangeal joints. In this, there is thickening of the synovial membrane, there is diminution of the synovial fluid, degradation of the cartilage, and the bones which are adjoining these joints also show osteopenia. So there is osteopenia of the bones, deformities of the bones. So you can see these characteristic swan neck deformity, deviation of the fingers, and extremely painful condition. So the patient has presence of hyperplastic papillary structures of the synovium, and this occurs because of the perivascular inflammation by B lymphocytes and CD4 positive T lymphocytes. The fibrin covers the synovium and forms aggregates. So when you aspirate out, you will get the fibrinoid material, fibrinous material, which is there. There is increased osteoclastic activity leading to erosion of the articular cartilage and the underlying bone, formation of causing osteopenia and osteoporosis, and subarticular cystic spaces because of the loss of the bone which is occurring just beneath the joints. It may also present with multiple subcutaneous nodules which are called as the rheumatoid nodules. So morphologically it is very distinct, and clinically it is distinct because it involves the small bones of the hands and feet, small joints of the hands and feet, in contrast to the degenerative joint disease which is seen in the osteoarthritis. Now, what is the pathogenesis of rheumatoid arthritis? Rheumatoid arthritis is an immune condition, autoimmune condition. There is activation of CD4 positive T cells and B lymphocytes, and there is presence of rheumatoid factor which can be done by in the serum analysis. You can take the serum and look for rheumatoid factor. There is liberation of interleukin 1 and tumor necrosis factor which cause proliferation of the synovium, increased vascularity of the synovium, and increase in the activity of the osteoclasts which have a resorptive effect leading to osteopenia. Now the immune complexes which are formed, they deposit in the blood vessels and they deposit in the joint cavity, leading to deformities of the wrist, deformities of the fingers, and deviation of the fingers towards the ulnar side called as the ulnar deviation. How do we diagnose them? We diagnose them by their characteristic clinical presentation of pain and difficulty in movement of the small bones of hands and feet. When more than 3 joints are involved, especially the small joints, or there are subcutaneous rheumatoid nodules, presence of serum rheumatoid factor, and symmetrical involvement of the hands, joints of the hands and feet, symmetric polyarthritis, the diagnosis is confirmed. Fine. So this is what happens in rheumatoid arthritis. There is papillary proliferation of the synovium. The synovial lining is proliferating, and the underlying there is excessive vascularity which is seen. So beneath the synovium, there is increased number of blood vessels and lymphocytes and plasma cells which are forming the rheumatoid factor. This is fibrinoid necrosis surrounded by lymphocytes and macrophages forming a characteristic rheumatoid nodule, which can present as subcutaneous nodules on the small joints, especially in the distal and proximal interphalangeal joints. While the gout is associated with deposition of monosodium urate crystals occurring because of the hyperuricemia. So whenever there is an increased body levels of the uric acid with hyperuricemia, you have deposition of urate crystals in the joint, in the synovium, leading to decreased mobility and painful enlargement of the joint area. Which is the joint which is characteristically involved is the big toe. The big toe is the one which is characteristically involved. So it may occur with a monoarticular attack or sometimes with the multiple joints may be involved, and many of these patients may present with non-symmetric synovitis. How do we diagnose them? By doing a serum uric acid levels. Uncommonly, similar presentation may be there by deposition of calcium pyrophosphate deposition disease. These are important for you to remember that this can all occur gout and pseudo gout-like structures only for your PG entrance examination. For your routine clinical examination of the patients, suffice is to remember that this is because of the hyperuricemia and it occurs with characteristic involvement of the big toe, which presents with enlarged tender toe which is present. And when you do the serum uric acid levels, it would be high. Treatment is simply easy because you give the xanthine oxidase inhibitor allopurinol. So once the diagnosis is made, the treatment is easier. So this is what? There is deposition of uric acid crystals. And when you aspirate it, instead of getting the inflammatory cells, you will get these needle-shaped crystals, which on polarizing microscopy will show birefringence. So sharp needle-shaped crystals of uric acid, and this presents like an inflamed joint similar to the septic arthritis, similar to acute pyogenic arthritis, but it is not. So characteristically seen over here, and when you do a biopsy, you will see these uric acid crystals surrounded by multinucleated giant cells. Fine. So good wishes to all of you. If there are any questions, I'll be able to take them. So remember that joints may be involved with many systemic disorders, but we have to make a diagnosis by looking at what joints are involved, synovial fluid assessment, and by making a characteristic use of the, like looking for rheumatoid factor in rheumatoid arthritis. So somebody has asked me how to differentiate between cells in leiomyosarcoma and fibrosarcoma. The cells in leiomyosarcoma will resemble smooth muscle cells and will be positive for smooth muscle actin, while those of fibrosarcomas will be long spindled out cells with abundant collagen in between, resembling fibrocytes or fibroblasts. And they will not express smooth muscle markers, they will only express vimentin. Any other questions from the 200 of you who have logged in? You can ask your questions, I am waiting, or we will cover it up in the small group discussions tomorrow with your tutorial classes. I hope your clinics have started from today. You have been going to your OPD sessions. So try to see some of these patients over there. So good evening to all of you and have a nice cup of tea now.